She cheated on me with my best friend, then lost everything overnight. The champagne flute slipped from Sarah's fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the penthouse, like a gunshot. Golden liquid spread across the pristine white tiles, seeping into the grout lines, like guilt into a conscience. She stood frozen in her designer dress, clinging to her trembling form as she stared at the email on her phone. In less than 60 seconds, her entire world had crumbled, and she had no one to blame but herself. 24 hours earlier, Sarah Mitchell had been on top of the world. At 32, she was the youngest senior partner at Whitmore and Associates, lived in a $3 million penthouse overlooking Central Park, and was engaged to Marcus Chen, a man who loved her, with the kind of devotion most people only read about in novels. But Sarah had always been greedy. It wasn't enough to have everything. She needed to know she could have anything. That's how it started with Jake. Jake Thornton had been Marcus's best friend since college, the kind of friend who showed up at 3 a.m. when your car broke down, who knew your coffee order better than you did, who was supposed to be the best man at their wedding. He was charming in that effortless way that made people gravitate toward him, with a crooked smile that suggested he knew all your secrets, but would never tell. Sarah had always found him attractive, but it was a harmless observation, like admiring a painting in a museum you'd never dream of stealing, until the night of the company gala. Marcus had been in Singapore on business, and Jake had offered to be Sarah's plus one, so she wouldn't have to navigate the evening alone. Can't have the future Mrs. Chen fending off corporate wolves by herself, he'd said with that trademark grin. Sarah had laughed, grateful for the company. The firm's annual gala was a crucial networking event, and having someone familiar by her side would make the endless small talk more bearable. The ballroom at the St. Regis had been transformed into a winter wonderland, despite it being late September. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the walls, and everyone who was anyone in the financial district was there. Sarah had worn the crimson Valentino dress Marcus had bought her for her birthday, the one that made her feel invincible. "You look incredible," Jake had said when he picked her up, and something in his voice was different, deeper, hungrier. Sarah had brushed it off, attributing the flutter in her stomach to pre-event nerves. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, the air between them grew charged with an electricity she couldn't ignore. Every accidental touch sent sparks through her skin. Every shared glance lasted a heartbeat too long. "I want to get some air," Jake had suggested after her third glass of champagne, and Sarah had nodded, desperate to escape the suffocating tension. The hotel's rooftop garden was deserted, the city lights spreading out below them like a carpet of stars. Sarah had walked to the edge, gripping the railing as she tried to steady her breathing. She could feel Jake behind her close enough that his warmth cut through the cool night air. "Sarah," he'd said, and her name on his lips sounded like a confession. She'd turned around, and suddenly he was there so close she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "We can't," she'd whispered, even as her body betrayed her, leaning into him. "I know," he'd replied, but his hand was already cupping her face thumb, tracing the line of her jaw. The kiss was everything a first kiss shouldn't be: desperate, guilty, and absolutely intoxicating. It tasted like betrayal and desire, like everything forbidden, and everything she'd never known she wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah knew she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. "We should go back," she'd said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We should," Jake had agreed, but neither of them moved. That night, they'd taken separate cabs home. Sarah had lain awake until dawn, her lips still tingling, her mind racing with the magnitude of what she'd done. She'd kissed her fiancé's best friend. She'd wanted to do more than kiss him. And the worst part, she wanted to do it again. She'd tried to forget. For 2 weeks, she'd thrown herself into work, avoided Jake's calls, and played the perfect fiancé when Marcus returned from Singapore. But addiction doesn't care about good intentions, and Sarah was addicted to the way Jake made her feel: wild, desired, dangerous. The second time was at Marcus's birthday dinner. 20 of their closest friends crammed into their favorite restaurant, laughter and wine flowing freely. Sarah had worn Marcus's favorite dress, smiled at all the right moments, and felt like a fraud. Jake sat across the table, careful not to look at her too often, but she could feel his awareness of her like a physical touch. When she'd excused herself to the bathroom, she wasn't surprised when he followed a minute later. They'd collided in the narrow hallway, and suddenly she was pressed against the wall, his mouth on hers, hands tangled in her hair. It was reckless and stupid and absolutely thrilling. We have to stop, she'd gasped when they broke apart. I can't, Jake had confessed, his forehead pressed against hers. I think about you every second of every day. This is killing me, Sarah. You think it's not killing me? She'd shot back. He's your best friend. He's my fiancé. We're horrible people. I know, Jake had said, stepping back, running his hands through his hair. I know we are. But knowing didn't stop them. The affair became a secret that consumed them both. Stolen moments and empty offices. Text messages deleted as soon as they were read. A web of lies that grew more tangled with each passing day. Sarah became an expert at deception crafting alibis, with the same precision she used to build legal cases. Late nights at the office, emergency client meetings, weekend conferences that didn't exist. Marcus never suspected. How could he? Jake was his brother in everything but blood. Sarah was the woman he planned to spend his life with. The betrayal was so absolute, so unthinkable, that it became invisible. For 3 months, Sarah lived a double life. With Marcus, she was the successful lawyer, the devoted partner, the woman who had her life together. With Jake, she was someone else entirely passionate, reckless, alive, in a way that terrified and exhilarated her. She knew it couldn't last. Affairs like theirs were time bombs destined to explode and destroy everything in their path. But she couldn't stop. She didn't want to stop. The beginning of the end came on a Thursday afternoon. Sarah was in her office reviewing contracts for a merger that would make the firm millions when her assistant knocked on the door. There's a woman here to see you, Melissa said, looking uncomfortable. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. Something about Jake Thornton. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Send her in. She managed her voice surprisingly steady. The woman who walked through the door was stunning in an understated way, tall, elegant, with the kind of bone structure that belonged on magazine covers. Sarah recognized her immediately from Jake's Instagram photos. Claire, Jake's ex-girlfriend who had moved to London 2 years ago. Sarah Mitchell. Claire said, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk with feline grace. I've heard so much about you. I'm sorry, have we met? Sarah asked, fighting to keep her composure. Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. No, but I feel like I know you. Jake talks about you constantly, or at least he did. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure Claire could hear it. I'm not sure I understand why you're here. Don't you? Claire leaned back, studying Sarah with unsettling intensity. I came back to New York to win Jake back. Imagine my surprise when I discovered he's been having an affair with his best friend's fiancée. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah opened her mouth to deny it, but Claire held up a hand. Please don't insult my intelligence by lying. I hired a private investigator. I have photos, text messages, hotel receipts. I know everything. Sarah felt the room spin. What do you want? Initially, I wanted Jake back. But then I realized something: a man who would betray his best friend like this isn't worth having. Claire's smile turned sharp. So now I want justice. Marcus deserves to know the truth. Please, Sarah heard herself beg. You don't understand. This will destroy him. You should have thought of that before you slept with his best friend, Claire said, standing up. You have 24 hours to tell him yourself. After that, I will. The door clicked shut behind Claire, and Sarah sat frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She tried calling Jake, but he didn't answer. She left work early, driving aimlessly through the city as she tried to figure out what to do. There was no good option. Tell Marcus and destroy him, or let Claire do it and destroy him worse. That night, Marcus came home with flowers and champagne. To celebrate, he'd said, pulling her into his arms. The Singapore deal went through. We're set for life, baby. Sarah had stood there, roses in her arms, watching the man she was supposed to marry celebrate a future she'd already destroyed. The weight of her betrayal was crushing. Marcus was a good man, better than she deserved. He loved her completely, trusted her implicitly. And she'd thrown it all away for what? The thrill of forbidden passion. The intoxication of being desired by two men. I need to tell you something. She'd started, but the words died in her throat when she saw the pure happiness in his eyes. Whatever it is can wait, Marcus had said, popping the champagne. Tonight we celebrate. So she'd let him pour the champagne. Let him make plans for their future. Let him love her for one more night, even though she knew it was cruel. She'd fallen asleep in his arms, memorizing the feeling, knowing it would be the last time. The next morning, Sarah woke to an empty bed and the sound of Marcus's phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. She reached for it automatically, then froze when she saw the screen filled with messages from Jake. Marcus, call me immediately. I'm so sorry. Please let me explain. It didn't mean anything. Sarah's phone started ringing. Claire's name flashed on the screen. She'd run out of time. She found Marcus in the kitchen, his laptop open on the counter, his face a mask of stone. He looked up when she entered, and the pain in his eyes was like a physical blow. How long? His voice was deadly quiet. Sarah's legs felt weak. Marcus, how long? He roared, and she flinched. 3 months, she whispered. Marcus laughed, but it was a broken sound. 3 months. 3 months of looking me in the eye and lying. 3 months of sleeping in our bed after being with him. 3 months of planning our wedding while fucking my best friend. It wasn't like that. Now get out. His voice was calm now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. Pack your things and get out of my home. Marcus, please let me explain. Explain what? How you accidentally fell on Jake's dick. How you accidentally betrayed the person who loved you more than life itself. He stood up and Sarah saw that his hands were shaking. I gave you everything. My heart, my trust, my future. And you threw it away for what was he worth it, Sarah? Was he worth destroying everything we built? Sarah was crying now ugly sobs that shook her entire body. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Sorry. Marcus laughed again. You're sorry. Well, that fixes everything, doesn't it? He walked past her, then stopped at the doorway. You have 1 hour to pack. If you're still here when I get back, I'll have security remove you. The door slammed behind him and Sarah collapsed on the kitchen floor, the champagne flute she'd been holding shattering on impact. As she knelt there among the broken glass, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the managing partner at her firm. The subject line read, Urgent Mandatory Meeting. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Sarah, it has come to our attention that you have been engaged in conduct that violates our firm's code of ethics and professional standards. Effective immediately, your partnership is under review. Please report to my office at 9 a.m. sharp. Richard Whitmore. Sarah stared at the email, the words blurring through her tears. Claire hadn't just told Marcus, she'd told everyone. The next hours passed in a blur. Sarah packed her belongings mechanically, taking only what was hers. She left the engagement ring on Marcus's pillow, along with a letter she'd probably rewritten a dozen times. Not that words could fix what she'd broken. The meeting at the firm was brief and brutal. Claire had sent them everything: photos of Sarah and Jake entering hotels, screenshots of text messages, a detailed timeline of the affair. The firm couldn't have a senior partner embroiled in such a scandal. They gave her two options: resign quietly or be terminated publicly. Sarah chose resignation. By noon, she was unemployed. By evening, she was homeless, checking into a budget hotel with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Jake had left 17 voicemails, each more desperate than the last. She finally answered on the 18th call. Sarah, thank God, he breathed. I've been going crazy. Are you okay? Am I okay? She laughed bitterly. I lost my fiancé, my job, and my home in a single day. No, Jake, I'm not okay. Where are you? I'll come get you. We'll figure this out together. There is no together, Sarah said quietly. There never should have been. We destroyed a good man for nothing. It wasn't nothing, Jake protested. And Sarah, I love you. Do you? Or did you just love the thrill of taking something that wasn't yours? The question hung between them, unanswered and maybe unanswerable. That's not fair. Then none of this is fair. Marcus didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve friends like us. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling older than her 32 years. I need you to stop calling me Jake. We've done enough damage. Sarah, please. She hung up and blocked his number. The next weeks were the darkest of Sarah's life. Word of the scandal spread through their social circles like wildfire. Friends chose sides, and unsurprisingly, most chose Marcus. He was the wronged party, the victim of a betrayal so profound it was almost Shakespearean. Sarah became a pariah overnight. Her savings dwindled quickly. The New York legal community was smaller than people realized, and her reputation was in ruins. No firm would touch her. The woman who had once commanded 6 figures was now applying for positions she would have laughed at a year ago. Claire, it turned out, had been thorough in her revenge. She'd created a website detailing the affair, complete with evidence and a timeline. It was the first thing that came up when anyone Googled Sarah's name. Professional suicide in the digital age. Sarah moved from the hotel to a studio apartment in Queens, a far cry from her Central Park penthouse. She took a job as a document reviewer at a legal temp agency, mindless work that paid barely enough to cover her expenses. The woman who had once negotiated million-dollar deals now spent her days in a windowless room clicking through endless files for $25 an hour. But the professional destruction was nothing compared to the personal cost. Marcus had blocked her on everything, and mutual friends reported that he'd thrown himself into work, barely leaving his office. The vibrant, laughing man she'd known had become a ghost of himself, and Sarah knew she was responsible. Jake fared no better. Marcus had cut him out, completely ending a 15-year friendship with surgical precision. Jake's own relationship with Claire imploded spectacularly when she realized that destroying Sarah hadn't healed her own pain. He left New York entirely, taking a job in Seattle and trying to outrun his guilt. 3 months after the explosion, Sarah received a package at her Queens apartment. No return address, but she recognized Marcus's handwriting. Inside was a photo album she'd made for their first anniversary, pictures of their life together, annotated with inside jokes and promises for the future. Every page was intact except the last one, where their engagement photo had been carefully cut out, leaving only Sarah's handwritten words, "Forever starts now." She cried for hours, clutching the album to her chest. The life documented in those pages felt like it belonged to a different person, someone who believed in forever, who didn't know she was capable of such cruelty, who had everything and didn't know to be grateful for it. A year later, Sarah was still in Queens, still doing document review, still living with the weight of what she'd done. She'd started therapy, trying to understand why she'd thrown away everything good in her life for a fantasy. The therapist talked about self-sabotage, about fear of commitment, about the addiction of new relationship energy. All of it was probably true, but none of it changed what she'd done. She ran into Marcus once at a coffee shop in Midtown. He was with someone new, a beautiful woman with kind eyes, who looked at him the way Sarah once had. He saw her, she knew he did, but he looked through her like she was a stranger, which she supposed she was. The Sarah Mitchell he'd loved wouldn't have been capable of such betrayal. That woman had died the night she kissed Jake on a hotel rooftop. Sarah left her coffee untouched and walked out into the New York morning. The city moved around her, indifferent to her pain, full of people living their own complicated lives. She thought about the woman she'd been successful, confident, convinced she could have it all. That woman had believed she was invincible, that consequences were for other people, that love was a game she could win. Now she knew better. Love wasn't a game, and when you treated it like one, everyone lost. She'd had everything: a career others envied, a man who adored her, a life most people would kill for, and she'd destroyed it all for the cheap thrill of stolen moments with someone else's best friend. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to have everything, she'd ended up with nothing. The penthouse was gone, replaced by a studio with bars on the windows. The six-figure salary was gone, replaced by hourly wages that barely covered rent. The man who'd wanted to give her the world was gone, replaced by a ghost who haunted her dreams. But the cruelest loss was the person she'd been before, flawed, certainly, but worthy of love and trust. That Sarah was gone forever, replaced by someone who knew exactly what she was capable of when she thought no one was watching. As she walked through the city she'd once owned, Sarah thought about Claire's revenge. The other woman had wanted justice, and she'd gotten it. Sarah had lost everything overnight, just as the title of her story proclaimed. But Claire hadn't counted on one thing: sometimes losing everything is its own kind of beginning. Sarah wasn't the same woman who'd kissed Jake Thornton on a rooftop. She wasn't the woman who'd lied and schemed and betrayed. She was someone harder, sadder, but maybe eventually wiser. Someone who understood that trust once broken could never be fully repaired. Someone who knew that sorry was just a word when your actions had destroyed lives. The sun climbed higher over Manhattan, and Sarah kept walking. She had nowhere particular to go, no power lunches, no wedding planning, no secret rendezvous. Just another anonymous person in a city of millions, carrying the weight of her choices and the knowledge that she'd had it all and thrown it away. In the end, that was her real punishment. Not the lost job or the ruined reputation or even the broken heart. It was knowing that she'd held happiness in her hands and chosen to crush it for the fleeting high of forbidden desire. It was living every day with the memory of Marcus's eyes when he'd discovered her betrayal, the moment she'd watched love die and known she was the one who'd killed it. Sarah Mitchell had cheated on her fiancé with his best friend, and she'd lost everything overnight. But the losing hadn't stopped when the sun rose the next day. It continued with every breath, every memory, every glimpse of the life she could have had if she'd been a different kind of person. She'd wanted to have her cake and eat it too. Instead, she'd burned down the entire bakery and was left standing in the ashes, finally understanding that some hungers destroy everything they feed on, including, in the end, yourself. The city stretched out before her, full of possibilities she no longer believed in, and second chances she didn't deserve. Sarah pulled her coat tighter and kept walking, just another cautionary tale in a city full of them. A reminder that everything can be lost in a moment of weakness, and some things, once broken, can never be made whole again. Jake had called it love. Marcus had called it betrayal. Sarah knew it was both and neither. It was simpler and more complex than that. It was a choice made again and again to put her own desires above someone else's trust. It was the decision to reach for something that wasn't hers. Consequences be damned. And now she lived with those consequences every day. In a studio apartment with bars on the windows and a view of a brick wall, reviewing documents for barely a living wage, knowing she'd once had everything and thrown it all away, for nothing more than the thrill of being wanted by someone she shouldn't have. The champagne flute was long since swept up and thrown away, but Sarah still felt the sharpness of those broken pieces. They lived inside her now, a permanent reminder that some things once shattered could never be put back together, no matter how many tears you shed or how deeply you regretted the hand that broke them. She'd lost everything overnight, but the real tragedy was that she'd had everything to lose in the first place, and she'd been too greedy, too foolish, too intoxicated by her own desires to see it until it was gone forever. In the distance, the building that housed her old firm gleamed in the morning sun, a monument to the life she'd destroyed. Sarah turned away and headed deeper into Queens, into the life she'd earned through betrayal and lies. It wasn't much of a life, but it was hers, the only thing left that truly belonged to her. And perhaps that was justice enough to live every day with the knowledge of what she'd had and what she'd chosen to throw away. To wake each morning in a bed she'd made through her own actions, forever haunted by the ghost of the woman she could have been, if she'd just been satisfied with the tremendous gift of being loved by a good man. But she hadn't been satisfied. She'd wanted more. And in the end, more had cost her everything.